Well, good evening, everyone. I pray that everyone is well and blessed. How are you all doing? We see a lot of you in the chat tonight. How are you all? Oh, my goodness. Let's get started. Just want to say hello to a few folks. Hello to all of you. Oh, my. M.R. Negru. How are you, Patricia? Charles West, how are you, Brother Charles? Brother Clifford, how are you? Mr. The Original School, greetings to you as well. These Eye Views, hello, Sister Betty. Michael Joe Toya Jackson, okay. Notorious Hebrew, how you doing? Brother Darnell, good to have you back. Sister Diamond, how are you, sis? Shaya, Nika, Miriam, let's see, Marvette, Azanaya, okay. Minister Gwinnett, how are you, sis? Colored Girl 72, B. Smith, William Smithers, Felicia, how are you? Diane, hello, Gates of Huldah moderators, all of you, many blessings to each of you. Toria, how are you? Emma, KT, Shelley, A. Clear, Percy, how you doing? Robert, Rachel, Rose, Jerome, Yabu, Curtis, Alvina, Linda, Felicia, Toria. Okay, I think I got that. Brandon, Saw, Council's Girl, Deborah, The Secret Place of the Most High. All right, now, hey, I think I know a book with that name or something close to it anyway. Second Exodus, how are you? Inspired Identity, how are you, Sister Chantel? Valeria, V. Hannah, thank you for the super chat. Many blessings to you. How are you, Lorena? You always going to bed. You must do the night shift or something. All right, Lamp of Oil, Miriam. So thank you all for joining me tonight. Oh my goodness, I have quite a bit to share. I say that every time, don't I? But I really do. I have quite a bit to share with you, but I pray that you are all blessed. Um, yes, I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. So we're still in the series Time for the Nations to Reap. And so far, we've covered Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, Brazil. And yeah, we focused on the Netherlands in the last session. So if you have not heard them all, be sure to go back and listen to those. But I hope you all are seeing how Spain and Portugal put a lot of the foundational things in place that really set the tone for how our people would be treated and later identified. So the descendants of the ancient Israelites who were kicked out of Spain and Portugal after 1492 seem to just disappear from history. But history refers to them as the Sephardim. So I really want to dig into that discussion tonight and talk about the Sephardim because we need to know who these people are. Who are they? Where did they go? The old historical texts describe them as being of a dark, melanated hue. So, yeah, similar to what you see on the screen. I would say they look like Negroes, don't you think? But some would say, no. But if they looked like that, you see BB on the left, we have to ask, Harpo, who this man? If they were portrayed as dark, melanated folk, who this? Look who's coming to dinner. So, this article from the Times of Israel says, although his family hailed from Eastern Europe before immigrating to Israel decades ago, he says he is in fact part Sephardic in that he traces his family back to Jews from Spain. So, you all, I will be using that used word tonight just for clarity, and that's how it's used in most of the texts. But of course, you all know that our ancestors were not called that. So again, I'll be referring to it. But we need to talk about this. And I have some more to share about him as it pertains to what's happening now, but I'll get into that near the end. So let's look at this because when the Israelites were expelled, as I mentioned, this was seen as a critical turning point in Iberia's and the Sephardim's history. So we need to talk about this to get an understanding of what was going on during that time. And I know some of our other brothers and sisters have covered this, but I'm looking at it in the context of the slave trade, like what was going on, so that we can kind of trace some of these things as it was happening in these other nations. So many sources say the Israelites living in Portugal look like the Becaris people. And you see these people on the right. What do they look like? Because it's hard to believe that they all changed their skin color in such a short period of time. So I want to look at this source, and it's called A Treatise on Physical Geography, comprising hydrology, geology, meteorology, botany, etc. But the link is here for those of you wanting to pull this source up on your own and read some of this information. There are some interesting things in there that I found that I thought was interesting, but I want to share just some of this with you. So listen, it says, we are well aware that it has been repeatedly stated the American Indians are all of one hue. Such assertions could have proceeded only from theorists who had either a very limited or no acquaintance with them. The Arab tribes also exhibit a great variety of hues from the black of the Moghriba of the Sahara and the dark brown of the Shigya or the native of Oman to the comparatively fair hue of the Arab of Lebanon. The answer to such facts is intermixture. But listen, but the other features often show that there has been no intermixture. Thus, the Moghreba Arab shows by his features, hair, and general expression that he is not blackened by being partly of Negro descent. And we talked about that earlier, what the originals look like, not those folks who are in there today. It says, there is another fact which proves that the answer of intermixture is unsatisfactory. Where change of complexion is produced, as it often is by intermixture, there is only one or there is only an approximation to either of the colors. Thus, the mulatto is never as black as the Negro. So he's basically saying, okay, there's been some mixing here, but you can still tell that there's some resemblance, that someone has some of the dark color, even if they're mulatto, they're not as black as the Negro, but you can tell that they've been mixed. Now listen, it says, now in the cases we have mentioned, there is a complete similarity of hue. The argument from intermixture is further rebutted by historic knowledge. Thus, the Jews are a people who have ever, according to the prophecy, dwelt alone, without intermixing with the nations to this day. So listen. Now, this separate race all descended from brown ancestors. Do I need to read it again for the people in the back of the room? This separate race all descended from brown ancestors. Brown, you all. He said they had descended from brown ancestry. And this is where those whose elevators don't go all the way to the top will jump in and say, but that's not talking about black, because black doesn't really mean black. So for the rest who can clearly see, it is very evident that those they label as black people or Negroes don't have black skin. Our skin tones are different shades of brown. Do you agree with that? Different shades of brown. So let's go on, because he's going to make himself very clear. So he says, I'm going to read this part again. This separate race all descended from brown ancestors, for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob must have been as dark as Mar Yohanan. Listen, if not darker. So they didn't look like Bibi. So he's saying they exhibit every shade of color from the black Jews of Malabar, of whom we have such an interesting account by Dr. Claudius Buchanan, to the rose and lily complexion of the Jewesses on the banks of the Albion. We're going to talk about that. He said, we need go no further than the Jews of southern Spain and compare them with those of Holland and northern Germany to perceive a very striking difference. The Spanish Jew is always dark complexioned, and his hair is uniformly black, whilst the German Jew is often as fair as any German and has light or red hair with blue eyes. So something happened. The various shades of color observable among the Negro or African race tends to the same conclusion. Along the coast of Guinea, which is low, marshy, and hot, we find jet black complexions. And this is the very country from which American Negroes have derived. So for those people who are still trying to argue the point, let this be proof number 1001 as to what the people look like, okay? However, notice that he said those Jews from Europe who were living in Europe tended to be looking like Bibi. Some had red hair with blue eyes. So something happened where these lighter colors came in, and the prevailing thought is that they just seem to change colors like a chameleon and take on the phenotype of the host nations that they migrated to. Utter foolishness. Utter foolishness. But let's go on. So you see here, these images clearly show dark melanated people. The Bakharis. He's comparing those Israelites that left Spain and Portugal to these people. This is what they look like. And you can clearly see the woolly hair, you know? Just look at this. And now if we just insert some common sense in there and think about the climate during that time, what would those people need to look like to endure the hot sun. Just some food for thought for those who are still trying to argue the point. So let's dig into this a bit more. I want to share excerpts from this book, Port Jews. Port Jews, Jewish communities in cosmopolitan maritime trading centers. This is from 1550 to 950. Now, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to pull up a copy of this one. You might, because there is an ebook copy of it. So this is by David Cesarini. Let's look at some things that he says here. All right. Listen to this. In the mid-17th century, the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam, because remember we were talking about the Netherlands, instituted several communal ordinances which reflected and constructed the desired ethnic transformation of the Jews into whites. Mic drop right there. Mic drop. Did you hear what he just said? In the mid-17th century, the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam instituted several communal ordinances, laws, canons, which reflected and constructed the desired ethnic transformation of the Jews into whites. So what color were they before? What color was Miriam before she was struck with leprosy and she turned as white as snow? What color? Now, if you have no other source in your arsenal, this is one you need to have. Even if you need to screenshot that part, what color were they before? So for the people who keep commenting on the channel saying color doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with skin color, why don't you hop on over to the communities that whitewashed everything and tell them that? If it didn't matter, why did they change it? Why was there a need to make the world believe that the ancient Israelites looked like Bibi? Until you can answer that question, I have no need to respond to you. No need. So listen. So it says, whiteness became an operative principle in the organization of Jewish communal life in Amsterdam. Perhaps the first exclusionary practice emerged in 1627 when an ordinance was passed restricting access to burial at the community cemetery, officially opened only in 1618. Now that's an interesting date. A year before 1619. So the ordinance read in part, no black person nor mulatto will be able to be buried in the cemetery except for those who had buried in it a Jewish mother. Pay attention to that. Jewish mother. No black person or mixed person, mulatto, could be buried in the cemetery now that was supposed to be for Ish people. But you couldn't be buried there based on this ordinance unless you had a Jewish mother buried there. It says, none shall persuade any of the said blacks and mulattoes, man or woman, or any other person who is not of the nation of Israel to make Jews. So it says, while the prohibition intended all foreigners, or it was intended for all foreigners, the specification of blacks and mulattoes reflected both the reality of their presence as slaves or servants in the Amsterdam Jewish community, as well as the degree to which they were seen to draw negative attention. So I hope you're getting that. An ordinance passed in 1614 with the initial purchase of this Ouderkerk cemetery had already established a separate section intended especially for the burial of slaves, servants, and Jewish girls who are not of our nations. Though the motivation in 1627 still was halakhic. The language had in 12 years become explicitly racial. Now I'm reading through this because I'm going to connect some of these dots for you in a few minutes. But you need to pay attention. It's going to become clearer to you as I go on. It was hard being of a dark hue in that day. Think about what was going on in 1619. Of course, we know that has not changed. So we see segregation happening there. By this time, Israelites were being trafficked big time. So the official date on record of them being brought here was 1619. So all of this was taking place in these European nations. And of course, they didn't want anybody to think they owned slaves. They were trafficking them. But these places had slaves. So the question we should be asking, if this is a cemetery for Israelites and the sources tell us they were dark melanated people, why would they tell them they couldn't be buried there? We'll get to that. We will get to that. So listen to this. 4 years later, the men of the communal board decreed that circumcised Negro Jews were not to be called to the Torah or given any honorary commandment to perform in the synagogue. Now, we need to just stop right there. If this is a council representing Israelites, why would circumcised Negro Jews not be given any honorary commandments to perform in the synagogue? Why? So listen. For such is fitting for the reputation of the congregation and its good government. Dutch Protestant planters in Brazil had been making it difficult for their slaves to attend churches as early as, if not earlier, than a 1636 report to that effect by a Dutch Protestant pastor. So who are these people? So in 1647, a separate section of the Sephardic cemetery was established for all the Jewish Negroes and mulattoes. So again, we see segregation happening here. Let's go on though. Exceptions were limited to those who were born in Judaism, their parents. Now let's unpack this. Those who were born in Judaism, as in their parents were Israelites, but wouldn't that make them Israelites as well? Not if they or the parents converted to Catholicism and Christianity. They were basically saying after you convert to Christianity, your heritage is annulled. You are no longer an Israelite. I hope you get that. But there's more going on here. Let's keep going. Exceptions were limited to those who were born in Judaism, as in their parents, having been married with Kodashim, that is properly according to Jewish law, or those who were married to whites. So the exception was, well, you can be buried there if your parents, particularly your mother, they were married And we'll make an exception for those Israelites who are married to whites. So listen, in other words, very few, if any, blacks or mulattoes would have qualified for burial in the Jewish cemetery proper. Something to think about. As I said, we're going to unpack this as we go on. So listen, that so many blacks and mulattoes did receive burial in the segregated section of the Jewish cemetery after this ordinance reflects a communal rift when it came to treatment of slaves. So by this time, they were identifying those Israelites coming from Spain and Portugal as slaves because the trafficking was in full force at this time. So they were identifying them as slaves and creating or segregating things. So it was tough for those who would not convert, etc., or those who would not agree to marry outside of the Israelite community. So it says, while the Muhammadad or Muhammad, and I'm going to talk about this, wished to terminate the inclusion of blacks and mulattoes in Jewish life, individual owners clearly saw fit to continue including them. So in 1658, the Muhammad, it's not Muhammad, it's pronounced differently, Muhammad, I should say, decided that mulatto boys would no longer be admitted for study in the Amsterdam yeshiva of the Sephardim. So we're not going to allow these Israelite boys to be admitted for study. Based on a view expressed in the Talmud, some early medieval rabbis, as well as Maimonides, prohibited the teaching of Torah to one slave and ruled that such knowledge did not cause his liberation. So it's like, well, you really don't need to know Torah. You don't need to learn this because even if you learn it, we're not going to set you free. Do you see how this set up what was going on in the Americas later? It started here. So it says these 17th century mulattoes were not identified as slaves. However, the issue was their background. So remember, they didn't want to say they had slaves in Europe, in the Netherlands. They knew they were there. They knew they were Israelites because it says they were not identified as slaves on record. It was their background. It was their identity as Israelites. So it says such an exclusion of others considered unworthy had other general precedents. Listen to this. The Jesuit College of St. Peter. Oh boy. When they show up, we know what's going down, right? The Jesuit College of St. Peter and St. Paul in Mexico City, founded in 1582. So we're talking almost 100 years earlier, had included in its constitution a clause expressly forbidding the admission of blacks and mulattoes. Indeed, since the mid-1500s, full-blooded American Indians and blacks were not allowed to receive holy orders or hold sacerdotal office. So what's the connection with the full-blooded American Indians and blacks? For these two groups, the full-blooded American Indians and blacks, they were not allowed. You all. Let's go on. Let's go on. I don't want to get off track. I want to dig into this a little deeper, into this council of Muhammad. So it says, The 1638 founding document of the Kai Kadosh, Talmud Torah of Amsterdam, is well known as a merger agreement that brought three existing congregations together into one synagogue under one leadership council, and that's this council called the Mahamad. It bears the signature of 218 householding men of the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish nation in Amsterdam. So we know they're talking about Israelites. They managed to get 218 signatures saying they were agreeing to subject themselves to the authority of the new leadership. So if they are subjecting themselves to the authority of the leadership under this group, or this group, that tells you that the leaders in this group were not the true Israelites. They were another people. And they got these men, 218, to sign this agreement. How many of you think they did it willingly? We have the slave trade going on, segregation. Do you think they did it willingly? Just think about that. So it says, it is also well known that this document, along with the set of communal regulations drawn up later that year, granted nearly unfettered authority to the Mahamad. Looking at these two documents, along with an earlier one that established an umbrella government over the three congregations in 1622, and later references to them, there emerges a more nuanced view of how they functioned, both as political text and as documents in a working archive. So this group basically took over and they began implementing rules and laws, pretty much like the Pharisees. These were the Pharisees of the day. And they got these Portugal and Spanish Israelite men to sign this agreement to subject themselves to this council. Now let's go on. We're going to shift gears just a bit. We're going to talk about the Sephardim in Germany because you're going to see how all of this is connecting. So let's say the title is Germany's Door to the World, a Haven for the Jews, Hamburg, 1590 to 1933. So what was happening? Hamburg, Germany's dominant port city for centuries, also contained one of the largest, richest, and culturally most productive Jewish communities of the German-speaking lands. So this essay asks whether the supposedly cosmopolitan and open environment of this major German interport also created favorable living and working conditions for its Jews. So listen, a continuous Jewish presence in Hamburg is documented since 1590, when Sephardic Jews whose ancestors had left the Iberian Peninsula in the late 15th century. So who are we talking about? The people who look like the Bicarists. They found their way to North Germany via the south of France and the Netherlands. Hamburg's Registry of Resident Merchants of 1610 lists about 100 Portuguese, including dependents, although the immigrants were officially considered Catholics. It was never a secret that they were really Jews. So these are the ones that they had forced to convert. Throughout the 17th century, their situation was precarious. And this is why those men signed that document. Most of the Sephardic Jews were working in close conjunction with Spanish and Portuguese merchant houses, an important area of commerce for the city of Hamburg. So they allowed them to come in because they were bringing their money and their wealth with them. But these again were the ones who had been forced to convert. Now notice, during this time, they were working with the Spanish and Portuguese merchants. Let's go on. So it says they had important connections to high officials in the Spanish government because they had wealth. It says, needless to say, they were not allowed to practice their religion or worship in public. They buried their dead in a plot of land they had acquired in Danish Altona. So it says the Burgerstaff and the Lutheran clergy, who also instigated, so who are we talking about? They instigated random acts of violence against these people, and they made repeated efforts to have them expelled. The Senate defended their right to dwell in the city and to do business. You're going to see this is tied to business and money. It constantly warned that an expulsion would have damaged their effect on trade. So in the 1650s, when the number of the Sephardim had reached 600, the Senate also gave in to their petitions to consecrate a synagogue, not at least because it feared that if this were constantly denied, they would look elsewhere for a more tolerant location for their business. To ensure their unmolested existence, the Sephardic community also administered self-censorship. So it's like, okay, we've already been kicked out of one place. We're just trying to live. We need some place to be for our families. So we're just going to give in to some of these demands. We're going to censor ourselves so that these people won't have a problem with us. That's what's going on. So listen, no Hebrew books were printed that would upset Hamburg's clergy. Ostentatious dress or luxurious festivals, talking about the feast days, and even sleigh rides were forbidden or limited in order not to attract any attention from non-Jews. However, when in 1697, a heavy special contribution and annual taxes were demanded from the Portuguese, a number of influential families began to leave Hamburg for Amsterdam. So they had the money and they could leave. So now we see how they ended up in the Netherlands. This exodus marked the beginning of a continuous decline of the Sephardic community, which by the time of the French occupation numbered only 200 people. They went from 600 to 200, most of them of a modest financial means. So the wealthy left. Now you have, we can probably say the middle class somewhat there. But listen, the community never again flourished. And look what happened to them later. It was finally completely destroyed in the Nazi period. So during what? The Holocaust. All right, let's go on. Now pay attention here because you're going to see the distinction that is being made. Ashkenazim first settled in the early 17th century in Altona, which was under Danish control. Until well into the 19th century, they were called protected Jews. We need to just pause there. So when the Ashkenazi came, so they're saying, well, we are those people too. They moved in and they became a protected class, not our people. So, who against payment of a special annual tax were granted the right to settle, work, and practice religion. So no problem for you folks. From the start, many Jews from Altona went to do business in neighboring Hamburg. And from the middle of the 17th century, some gradually managed to settle there. Like the Sephardim, they were only allowed to worship in private gatherings. So, family, they were making a distinction. They were calling the Sephardim, those folks, those black, negroid looking people that moved there or they were expelled and they came from Spain and Portugal. They were called Sephardim, Sephardim Jews. But these folks, the Ashkenazis, when they came in, you can see that they were making a distinction between the two. So listen, a law of 1710, the so-called Jew regulation, determined in 23 articles the rights and status of Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews in Hamburg until well into the 19th century. In the middle of the 18th century, most Ashkenazim were economically active in trade and money lending or early forms of banking. Who was doing this before? Just think about this. Who was doing it before? Now we see them operating in some of the same types of businesses that the Sephardics were operating in. I hope you see this. So let's go on. I want to look at some things from this article entitled The Jewish Blackness, Theses Revisited. And the link is here if you want to pull it up your own. There's a lot to go over in this article. So I pulled out some key things that I really want to focus on. It says the notion of the blackness of the Jews, or Jewish blackness, has become commonplace in scholarly discourse, going back to the path-breaking work of Sandra L. Gilman in the late 1980s. Scholars often assert that a strong European tradition, what was this strong European tradition? That dated back to the Middle Ages. Well, the strong European tradition dating back to the Middle Ages maintained that the Jews were black or at least swarthy. The term swarthy originates from the Old English word swarth, which means dark or dusky. It's primarily used to describe someone's skin tone or complexion, particularly when it is deep, dark, or brownish in color. Deep, dark. So back in the Middle Ages, they knew what the Israelites looked like. When Britain started trafficking our people, France, the United States, all of these other nations, they knew what they looked like. They knew who they were. They knew who they were. So it says, I'm going to go on. They maintain that the Jews were black or at least swarthy and find sharp expression in modern anti-Semitic literature. That in medieval literature, a theory prevailed in which the Jews were part of the black race, or at least dark-skinned, or that the general look, the phenotype, was considered to be that of the black. So this author is writing this article. He says it's meant as a caveat or a question mark on this prevailing notion. Well, we know what they thought back in the Middle Ages, but well, let's talk about this And this is when they say things like, well, black is not always talking about black. So he's inserting the idea that black can also refer to bad behavior. So when you see literature saying the Israelites were black or they were swarthy, just take it with a grain of salt when you read that literature. Here's the thing. When you read the information in context, you can tell when it's talking about skin color versus behavior. So it's a straw man argument. It's a distortion of the argument to make it easier to attack or refute the prevailing thought. So instead of addressing the actual argument of the opponent, the argument was these people were swarthy, they were dark. He throws this in like a, let's just put a twist on it. Because maybe they're not really talking about color after all. We can't say that for sure. They could be talking about this person's behavior. So it says one issue with the notion is ambiguity. Jewish blackness sometimes can be, listen to what he says here. One issue is the ambiguity. Let me throw some cold water. It sometimes means that the Jews were quite literally seen as black based on what Gilman said, which is a matter of color, but often a more provocative sense is implied, which refers to race. However, proving each of these two senses of blackness, color, or race requires a different kind of evidence, and evidence that supports one sense might undermine the other. For example, calling a you white Negro. Does that make any sense whatsoever? But this is what he's saying. So it corroborates the racial sense of the Jewish blackness, but undermines the color sense, referring to the you as white. And this is where they just start pontificating about utter nonsense, so that you're not really understanding what they're talking about. So he says black then can refer to several things. It can be race, it can be color, and it can be a mere metaphor. Even though in our sources, these senses are not always easy to distinguish, they must be sorted out, at least theoretically. So he says, merging all the senses together and providing evidence that supports any of them, even when it contradicts others, may end up cherry picking. So basically, if you read the literature and it tells you that Abraham was a dark brown, you're cherry picking because it could mean, well, talking about his behavior. You all. Yeah. Listen, let's go on, because these folks are just silly. So let's go to the part where he says, let's examine the evidence. So he says, let us now analyze in some detail several pieces of evidence for the Jewish blackness thesis, taken mostly from the pioneering source on the subject, Gilman's essay, The Jewish Nose, Are Jews White? So it says the essay has been cited extensively and reprinted in textbooks on racism and otherness, gaining ground in Jewish studies and beyond. So he says the initial formulation is the general consensus of the ethnological literature of the late 19th century was, listen, that the Jews, the Israelites, were black, or at least swarthy. As the essay continues, however, Both the weaker term swarthy and the inverted commas or scare quotes are dropped. And the term used is the blackness of the you, and not in a metaphoric sense. So, based on Gilman, his conclusion is that the Israelites, were quite literally seen as black. Let's go. You can't make this stuff up with these people. So the time frame causes some difficulties. The above mentioned general ethnological consensus on the blackness in the late 19th century is somewhat incompatible with this Rudolph guy's extensive study of over 10,000. Look at who they're studying. German school children. Now, family, we already know what they look like. So if these are the people that you're studying, what conclusion are you going to make? So it says he studied over 10,000 German school children, and this was published in 1886, which found them to be indistinguishable in terms of skin, hair, and eye color from the greater masses of those who lived in Germany. Again, this is where they gaslight. They play games because you already know what the original look like, those who came from Spain and Portugal. But now you're going to compare them to these folks who converted, who were living in Germany, the fair-colored people, red hair, blue eyes, etc. So then this is why they came to the conclusion of, well, then it's not always talking about the skin color. It could just be talking about their character, their behavior. I hope you're getting this. But it says, however, Gilman insists that the view that the Jews were black had a long history in European science. Science was proving that the Israelites look like Negroes. You seeing this? Providing several pieces of evidence from the late 17th or early 18th century onward. So Gilman is like, I'm not backing down on this. We know what these people look like. The science is proving it. This is what they look like. So the earliest is from Francois Mission in 1650 to 1722, whose ideas influence Buffon's natural history. And Mission's travel guide to Italy is quoted in the English translation of 1714. 'Tis a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews, who marrying always among one another beget children like themselves, and consequently the swarthiness of their complexion is entailed upon their whole race, even in the northern regions. But the Jews who are originally of Germany, for example, are not blacker than the rest of their countrymen because they converted to a religion. But these folks, they want to act like they can't figure this out. We don't really understand what you mean. What do you mean they were black or swarthy? Well, it's not really talking about black skin. Come on now. Let's go on. Let's go on, family. So it says, we have this quote most of you have heard that's being referenced. People are attributing it to Hitler. So Kafka, as Gilman notes, was a fervent reader of the Zionist periodical, and this title was called Self-Defense. And it was bemoaning the anxiety of the Jews about their own bodies as signs of their inherent difference. So Warrer claims that for the soul, even of the blackest of Jews can be as pure as gold. Basically saying, well, these people who are saying, yeah, we did wrong. So because of what we did, our souls are black. But he's saying, well, even for the blackest of those people, your soul can be as pure as gold. So it says this might refer to skin color, even though apart from quoting Songs of Solomon's, Warwer only mentions the true black-haired Jew. He says his emphasis is added. Rather than associate the Jew's blackness with Africa, as one would expect if skin color were at stake, Warwer actually mentions the marks of their Asian origin. Asian origin. So think about where Abraham came from. Finally, one last instance has a bearing on Gilman's castigation of the prominent American psychologist Erik Erikson. Gilman accuses Erikson, who grew up as Erich Hamburger. Listen, he grew up as Erich Hamburger in a German-ish family, of having fled his own identity. And they called it self-hatred. So this is where this notion of, well, we're talking about black behavior. Your behavior's bad. We're not talking about your actual skin color. So he was analyzing Hitler's racial typology. So Erikson writes that the U is described as small, black, and hairy all over. This guy now who grew up as a self-hating U. So Gilman actually denies that Hitler propagated an image of the U as black. For Hitler, the linkage between the U and the black was a political one, and claims that Erikson simply recreates the image of the U as black with which he himself grew up. So listen, whether Erikson grew up with such an image remains to be proven. As for Hitler, though, in his Mein Kampf, he talks of the Jews not only as politically allied with blacks, but also as these Negroid parasites. These Negroid parasites who corrupt our innocent, fair-haired girls. We'll leave that right there then. So let's see what happened in 1655, because now we want to look at the forgotten port Jews of London. Court Jews who were also port Jews. So in 1655, England went to war with Spain, with the consequence that Spanish merchants and their property in the country were rendered liable to seizure. So in March of 1656, the property of this man, Antonio Rodriguez, a merchant of Portuguese origin who was superficially a new Christian, was impounded by the authorities in London on the grounds that he was an enemy alien. So on 24 March 1656, 6 Iberian-born merchants, all former new Christians. Who are we talking about, family? petitioned Oliver Cromwell, the head of state, asserting that they were Portuguese of the Hebrew nation and not Spanish. They wanted to separate themselves. Like, this is who we really are. So they sought to preempt measures against their conduct of trade and obtain permission to live and worship in London as Portuguese Jews. So in this démarche, the Portuguese Jews in London were driven to act by a threat to their mercantile interests. It's like, look, we got to stand up and say something, or they're going to kick us out of business. We're going to lose our wealth, etc. So emerging openly as Jews was paradoxically the best way to parry the danger. Religious identity and maritime enterprise were fused. So it's like, okay, we're going to overlook some things because these people are wealthy. They're running businesses. They're bringing money in here. So we're just going to overlook some things, let them practice their religion for now. For now. Let's keep going and see what happens. Now, this part is extremely important. So from the mid-17th to the late 19th century, London's Jews were primarily engaged in the business of exchange. Whether as shopkeepers or brokers, they became respectable and valued members in business circles and the mercantile community. During the campaign for the relief of civil disabilities, the city was a stronghold of support for the Jewish cause. Yet, by the 1860s, the Port of London had been transformed and exchange had ceased to be its primary function. With the transformation of the port, the image of the merchant and the romance of exchange palled. So the port was now a place of transshipment, processing, and manufacture. It was crowded, filthy, and dangerous. In the last phase of the development of port cities, with which this essay is concerned, listen, Jews moved from being merchant who engaged in exchange to being commodities. Please don't miss this part, because the author doesn't come out and tell you what happens. You have to read between the lines. Listen, the Jews moved from being merchants who were engaged in exchange to being commodities that were shipped from one place to another. Please tell me you got that. This is the politically correct way to say they forced them into slavery. And now we are shipping your behinds around the world. They became the property of the Europeans. The sword was chasing them, and they thought they escaped it. They thought they did. But listen to this, you all. From the 1880s, London was both a point of entry for mass immigration from Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe. Who are we talking about? And a stopping off place for use en route to North or South America and South Africa. These Jews played no part in the mercantile community, and their fate was determined elsewhere. So our people, the ones who were doing it, they were replaced by these who were coming in from elsewhere, who basically just kind of stepped into those roles and took over. Now listen as I read some excerpts from this journal article. Again, I'm not sure if you can get your hands on some of these articles. Some of them you may need a subscription. I'm not sure. If you can Google it and you can pull it up, it'll be worth you keeping it and storing it. If not, then get a screenshot. So let's take a look at this called Black Jews. Black Jews. This is by Ralph Bennett. So it says the following article in 3 parts explores the various groups of Jews of Negroid descent or Black Jews. The first 2 populations discussed are from Ethiopia and India, whose histories claim ancient beginnings. The third group discussed is comprised of Jews of African descent from Suriname, a tiny country located on the northeast coast of South America, which was once a Dutch colony. I talked about them in the last session. It is hoped that these articles will result in a broadened awareness of the diversity of both Black and Ish culture. So the Black Jews of the world have evoked the curiosity and interest of both scholars and the general public because of their double minority status. The histories of the Black Jews of India and Ethiopia are fascinating, especially considering the hardships they have endured to preserve their ancient cultures. The groups from India and the Falashas of Ethiopia have past extending back to antiquity. In fact, they are considered by some scholars to represent 2 of the lost tribes of ancient Israel. Interesting. Let's go on. Okay. The communities of the Black Jews of the world have evoked a fascination among the public and interest among scholars. I read that because of their double minority status. What's the double minority status? Well, the color of your skin, for one, and you're now a part of that hated group, the Israelites. So it talks about these people, these Black Jews in Suriname. So it says, this occurred as a consequence of the fact, listen, that the white Jews of Suriname were the only large community of Ish slave holders in the world. Mic drop right there. Bingo. Who were the slaveholders? So something happened where one group disappeared and went into slavery and completely took over the identity of the original. And they were the ones. They were the ones who were the slaveholders. It says this group in Suriname were the only large community of Ish slaveholders in the world. During the period of slavery, the country was home to 2,000 European colonists and 70,000 Africans. Of the Europeans, approximately half were Christian and half were Ish, although there were some isolated instances of Ish plantation owners in other countries. Suriname was the only country in the world which had a white population that was almost evenly divided between Jews and Christians, and where the Jews formed such a large community of plantation-owning slave masters. Yeah, this is a source you want to get your hands on. Let's keep going. This comes from the journal article that I shared in the last session, Access to the Netherlands of Enslaved and Free Black Africans. And I read this quote: the first Black Africans came from Spain or Portugal to the Netherlands, England, and Germany in the context of North European contact and competition with South European merchants. Some, but by no means the majority of the slaveholders, were part of the Sephardic diaspora that facilitated trade and the colonization of the Portuguese Atlantic. But who were we talking about? The people who took on the identity of the original people. These people were the slaveholders. I hope you got that. I know I'm covering it a lot, and I'm not deviating right now to go to comments because I want to get through this. I really want to get this so that you all understand what's happening, because there's so much to cover. So when I asked the question in the last session, who are the Sephardic Jews helping to facilitate the trade and the colonization in the Portuguese Atlantic? Now you know. Now you know. Now let's go back to the article. So the Jews of Suriname. It says the communities of the Black Jews of the world, again, talking about how it evoked this fascination and this interest because of their double minority status, etc., etc., etc. So we go back to this part where it talks here about Suriname and how this white population that was almost evenly divided between Jews and Christian formed a large community of plantation-owning slave masters. And again, the things that were happening, it was like a cycle. Things were repeated in the other colonies. So for those those sources that tell us that a lot of them were the ship owners, and they try to, oh no, that wasn't us. It was, yeah. So how do you deal with this source right here? How do you whitewash this part? One group disappeared and went into slavery family. That's what happened. And the other group took on their identity. So I hope you're seeing this. That's how they disappeared. So let's go on. It says the original Jewish immigrants who settled in Suriname were of Sephardic, Portuguese, and Spanish origin. This is what they look like on the right. They arrived with David Nassi in 1667 after being expelled by the Inquisition from their plantations in Brazil. Later on, listen to this, later on, they were joined by a small number of Ashkenazic, German, and Dutch-speaking Jews. Where we went, they followed. They found their way to Suriname directly from Europe. So by 1694, there were approximately 90 Sephardic families and 10 Ashkenazic ones, making a total of 570 in Suriname. Together, they owned 40 estates and 9,000 slaves, which is about half the number of plantations and slaves in the colony at the time. But the Ish planters' prosperity can be gauged from the fact that in 1695, the Ish community contributed 26,000 pounds of sugar to a hospital that the governor of Suriname was having built. By 1704, so you have to think about what was happening by 1704, family. The influx of German-speaking Jews now made them half as numerous as the Sephardic, the original. And as the early part of the 18th century progressed, still more Ashkenazi Jews arrived. By 1716, the Ashkenazis bought a plot of land in the capital of Paramaribo, on which they planned to erect their own separate congregation. We don't want to be with them folks anymore. So listen, from that date onward, from 1735 onward, there were always two separate factions of the Ish community: the Sephardis, those who were of the original, and the Ashkenazis. You all, I know I want to jump on the comments and see what you all are saying, but I need to get through this. Let's go on. I hope it's being helpful to you, though. It says, before the two subgroups were separated from each other in 1735, all Suriname Jews, both Sephardic and the other group, belonged to one community. But remember what was going on. They had basically taken over, and our people were being subjected because they didn't want to be kicked out. So they attended the same Sephardic synagogue located, and they give this Jewish savannah. This was an autonomous Ish settlement established under a special charter from the Dutch authorities. So it says, listen, the white male plantation owners, this is key, often took their slave women for mistresses and later on for wives when it became legal. Suriname-style marriage was a colloquial term for the relationship between a planter and his slave mistress. It was common practice. Listen, the only way for Blacks to escape the confines of the color distinction was the so-called marriage Suriname style, in which usually free mulatto women married or more often cohabitated with European males. This specifically Surinamese phenomenon was a direct result of the highly skewed sex ratio in the colony and led to an increased group of mixed blood. So I need you to understand what happened here. By this time, our people were being controlled or they were slaves. So they had our women to cohabitate with the European Ash people. But the Negro, the Israelite Negroes, could not marry their women. Now remember, the Ish trace their lineage through the mother. Pause and think on that. So when they say they have this ancestry, that their line, their bloodline is from the original, is because these folks were mating with Hebrew women and having children with them. And they took their identities, their Ish identities from these union. So they became the people, the Jewish people, because they now trace the ancestry back to the mother. Please don't miss that. Don't miss that point. Let's go on. But now you see why the priority is placed on the mother's bloodline. So it says, because marriage between Blacks and whites was illegal in the 18th century, the contract had no legal foundation. Usually the couple would cohabitate, and proper society would wink at their union. Several Surinamese synagogue elders wrote the following in 1794 about this arrangement. So you know slavery's in just blowing up at this time. It says several among the Portuguese-ish nation, out of private affection, you all, begot children with some of their female slaves or mulattoes. Listen to this and try not to barf. Out of particular love for the Ish religion, the boys were properly circumcised and the girls were instructed by a teacher, as were their descendants. Some of these were manumitted or set free at the request of their patrons, and others, having them born out of wedlock after manumission, were instructed by their mother, of whom they were born, and took the name, look at it, of Portuguese Jews. This created a rather large class of biracial people in Suriname. There had always been a shortage of eligible women in the colony, for most of the colonists who had immigrated there were single young men. As the decades passed, the young-ish men began to legally marry women of African or mixed African and European descent. Their children, in turn, were often raised in the Ish faith. Many of these people, in turn, had descendants who remained Ish, ultimately creating a sizable population of Black youths. Y'all, I hope you see why the priority is placed on the mother's bloodline, though. I hope you see that. This is why. This is why. In summation, the youths in Suriname seem to have treated their slaves sometimes quite well. So then who's the slave and who's the slave master? And sometimes as meanly as did other plantation owners. Listen, they allowed Blacks who were the children of white youths to be schooled in the Jewish faith and brought into the social framework of the temple. But because of prejudice and the fear of going against the wishes of the mother congregation in Amsterdam, the Black youths were never given full status and were demoted to second-class citizenship in the synagogue. After the Brotherhood of the Black Youths, Darhis Jasarum, was outlawed, the Black youths essentially ceased to exist as a separate identifiable group. Those who wanted to maintain their Ish identity gradually melded into the larger Ish community, but many defected and became Christians. I told you all I had a lot to cover. I told you I had a lot to cover, family. Let's see what some of you are saying before I go to my comments. Like I said, there's a lot to cover, a lot to cover. Thank you all. Thank you for the super chat. So many of you. V. Hannah, Shelley, Yaz Grace, Mesha, Diamond Love, Brother Calvin, Jason, Jerome, Marquita, Minister Lynette, Carmen, Thomas, BN, Change, and Chris Matthews. Thank you all. So, yeah, like I said, I had a lot to cover. And look, you all, that took me almost an hour and a half to get through that. So when Walker says they have taken crafty counsel, I'm trying to tell you, I'm just trying to tell you, Charles West, that's what happened in Ezra. The foreign men were marrying our women and pretending to be us. Thank you, Pride of Judah. So, okay. So, chosen daughter of Yah, many of us fell out on the floor. I covered a lot, but this tells you it's connecting the dots. Some of the puzzle pieces. Now you see what happened. Brother Harold says they are still trying to erase us. No kidding. No kidding. Saul says they want us to be so much. They want to be us so much. They will soon be experiencing the wrath of the Most High Yah in the form of curses. They do, just they don't want the skin color. They want to say they have the bloodline. They don't want the skin color, though. You see what I'm saying? Yes. So Kana says you pull the veil back on them, Sister Huldah. Brother Jay says, welcome to the Twilight Zone. Drea, as if the Most High don't see them doing this. Who do they think they're fooling? Well, obviously they fooled the world, honey, because everybody think they're the people. Miss the original school. Esau intermingling his seed, and it became spoiled. You got that? You got that? All praises to Yah. Yes, sir. Yes. Walter says he's from Berbice, Guyana, which is close to Suriname. So you may have some information on this already. Yes, I'm telling you, it's a lot. Jason says, I'm glad we're all getting understanding right now at this moment. Absolutely, because family. That's what I wanted to talk about next. There is a lot going on, and as you can see, the deception runs deep. The confederation against our people began centuries ago, but we're still reeling from the effects today. So by uncovering these truths, it's helping us to pray effectively. My daughter and I were talking about this the other day, because as I was going through some of these nations, she was surprised to learn about some of them I covered. She said she had no idea that a few of them were involved in the trade, to the extent that they were. So in the first session that I did in this series, I told you about William B. Trotter and how he said he was making his case for slavery. So I told you that we were also going to make ours, but we would be presenting our case to the righteous judge. That's what happens in the court of law. The case is presented about the wrongs done to a person or people so that the judge can make a ruling after you hear what the wrongs were. So we need to be saying more than they need to pay for slavery. This series, this information is presenting the details of the wrongs committed and how it has harmed us and our ancestors. You need to be specific. We have the parable about the widow woman going to the unrighteous judge, and she kept going to plead her case. She wanted justice. So we know that we have a righteous judge. The Most High is the righteous judge, and we need justice. We are not going to forget about what was done to us and move on like they want us to. We're not going to do it. But you can clearly see that our prayers are working. The shift is happening all over the world. Our prayers are being answered, family. No longer are those who are walking in this truth depending on protests and marches to try to get the oppressor to stop mistreating us. They won't, because they want to erase us. So why don't they see us out there? Because we went into our prayer closets. We went to the prayer closet. We took our case to the righteous judge. We repented. We made our petitions known, and we asked him to judge our oppressors. And we're standing on his word concerning our deliverance. He's shaking things up, and we need to stay out of things that do not concern us. They are trying really hard to drag us into it, to tie us into what's happening in the Middle East. They're rolling out their paid agents, those who happen to look like us, telling us we need to stand with you know who. We need to stand with those who had a hand in oppressing us. Are you serious? I'm praying for Yah's perfect will to be done. I'm praying for the back of the oppressors to be broken. I'm praying for deception to be exposed. Yes, we can be compassionate for the innocent caught up in all of this, because there are innocent people. They are the ones who will suffer long after those political leaders move on to their next conquest. But pay attention to the propaganda, especially when it comes to us. They need a charge against us so that they can paint this picture that we are anti. We are descendants of Shem. So no, we are not anti-Semitic. They are desperate, you all, to make it seem like we support those who terrorize others. No, we don't. We don't. Do what y'all gonna do. We're gonna stay in our prayer closet. We're taking our petition to the Most High. We're lifting up Israel right now. We're lifting up Israel. But by now, we should know how they operate, family. If they can't find something, they will manufacture it. The enemy is using the same old playbook, and we know the outcome. They kill, steal, and destroy. When it comes to their seed, it's in their nature. But family, instead of focusing on the enemy's playbook, let's look at Yah's playbook. There are many examples of him causing the enemies of Israel to fight against each other. Can we say the Civil War? I believe what's happening here is Mr. Bibi is overplaying his hand. And when they think they have the upper hand, he's going to cause them to fall flat on their faces. So whose side am I on? I'm on the side of truth and righteousness. For anyone taking the time to research history, they should be able to see who the oppressor has been. But in this season, we need to fortify ourselves, Israel, for what is to come. Even now, things are being put in place for the hidden things and the hidden ones to be revealed. These things are becoming more and more, or things that are happening in the world, is making this world more and more unrecognizable every single day. They're bringing about the plans and purposes of Halil. Satan and his minions. It shouldn't be difficult for people to recognize the face of evil when you see it. Look at the fruit. Look at the fruit of colonization. Is that not what we see before us, family? The beauty of it, though, is that it's all lining up with Scripture. So I know as you watch all of these things happening, there's a feeling of expectation because we see the prophecies unfolding. But it can also cause some to be anxious because there are so many questions. How am I going to do this? And what about that? So you fear what is to come. I've said many times, pray and ask Abba Yah to help you get rid of fear. These historical records that we're learning about, myself and others are sharing this information. They are showing us the wickedness that was done against us. But what the enemy meant for evil, Yah was working it out for our good. Even in the time of chastisement, he was hiding us so that the enemy could not wipe us out completely. So instead of fretting, get in Yah's presence so that you can grow in faith, not fear. Why should we fear what man can do to us? No, fear the one who has the power to raise things up and the power to tear things down. He's the one able to destroy body and soul. The Most High's word will not return unto him void. And all of the things that he said will have to be fulfilled, but it will happen in his perfect timing. So my advice for you, be careful how you hear in this hour, because deception will wax greater and greater. So be careful how you hear. Don't just react when you hear someone say something. Some are opening themselves up to deception. We have to be wise in these last days because it will be harder and harder for the masses to separate the truth from the lie. Deception is the enemy's playground, family. He's a master at deceiving and leading people astray. Don't let that be you. So again, pray about what you hear and wait to get a confirming word. You hear some saying prophecies or throwing out a word and dates are being thrown out there. Take note of it and then watch and pray. But also take note of those who are saying and specifying these certain things that's supposed to happen by a certain date and a certain time, and then the date comes and it goes and they just move on as if they didn't say it. Some have been warned about doing that, and they continue to do it, not understanding how dangerous it is. When you say you're speaking for the Most High, you better know that you know that you know, because those very things will be your downfall. So be careful how you hear in this hour, family. For those putting dates out there, you better know the Most High told you that. Because after the warning and there's no repentance comes a public rebuke. And repentance is more than uttering words. It's a turning away from the thing, the transgression. I pray and I ask the Most High to put a guard over my mouth so that I'm not sharing things that I shouldn't be saying or that he's not ready for me to share. Just because you hear a word doesn't mean it came from the right source. Remember, the enemy is occupying the realm above us, the heavenlies. This is one reason why we need to know how to pray fervently and effectively to pierce through that dimension, or some would say that veil. But be careful when you are saying Yah said. You don't want to tread into areas where he has not sent you. We all need to accept and be satisfied with our portion. When you try to touch things that he did not anoint or appoint you to do, it becomes a curse to you because you don't have the anointing or covering to protect you. Think about Uzzah, the guy that tried to touch the Ark of the Covenant. He died immediately on the spot. On the spot. So, family, be careful when you hear a prophetic word. Somebody's telling you, well, this is going to happen and it's going to happen by this time, by this date. You take note of it, write it down. And then when it doesn't, okay, you said this. You said this. I did a series. When I did the series, Remembering the Second Exodus, that we were going to begin to see a funneling effect as we get closer to the time, as the Most High begins to streamline the message. And a lot of that is going to start happening. You're going to see that happening. He's going to streamline this thing. He's going to do this. So again, I'm trying to tell you all, a lot is happening, but you have to guard against confusion and taking in a lot of this stuff. You're being tossed to and fro because of what is being put forth by some as prophetic words, and it's causing confusion. So again, I say, learn how to fast, pray, study, and wait for a confirming word. You won't be disappointed or disturbed in the inner man when you learn how to be led by the Spirit of the Most High, family. That's not to say he's not placed gifts in us. He has. And he will pour into and out of the vessels as he sees fit. But we can't believe every spirit. We have to learn how to wait on the Most High. Prophecies are given for our benefit, yes. So we already know certain things will happen, but timing is important. You won't be disappointed when things don't happen in time set by man if you're waiting for the Ruach, to be led by the Ruach. That's where discernment comes in, because you need to know the source behind the voice. Ephesians 6:12 tells us that we are not wrestling against flesh and blood. We're wrestling against principalities, powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness where they're in the high places. Think about what happened when Gabriel brought the message to Daniel. Gabriel had to fight against the angelic prince of Persia. So when we believe that we've received a word from the heavenlies, it's important to test the spirit to know where it came from. It may have come from a familiar spirit. So the words may be somewhat right, but something's off. And those who are operating at that higher level of discernment, they pick up on it immediately. It's like, this isn't lining up with this, and that's not lining up with that. Something's not quite right. So you have to test it. When you test something, you have to test it by something. The thing that you use to test it will let you know if something's off. I hope you're getting this. We're told not to believe every spirit. And I'm telling you this because we know that the enemy is going to try to deceive the masses in these last days. So you need to know how to test the spirits, to see whether or not they are from Yah. So what are you doing really? You test what the spirits are saying. How well does it conform to Scripture? Here's the catch. For this test to be effective, you have to have a good understanding of what Scripture says. And that's the problem for some, because they don't have a good understanding of Scripture. And this is why we're told to study to show ourselves approved, a workman that won't have to be made ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. But the hardest ones are those words that come, those prophetic words that are subjective. It's not really spelled out in Scripture. Let me give you an example. And you all, I don't have to name this one or that one. I'm trying to teach you principles. If you learn the principle, it won't matter who said or who did. The principle will help you to understand what's really going on here, because we're not wrestling against flesh and blood. So let me give you an example, and this example, I believe, will bless you. Remember when Abraham was given a word that he would have a son, that a son would come from his loins in Genesis 15. Now we're talking about a man who knew the voice of the Most High. His actions made that clear. He heard Yah tell him to leave his people and go to the place that he would be shown. Abraham did that. How did he end up with Ishmael? Pause and think on that. How did he end up with Ishmael? And this is where some would say, well, blame Sarah. You're missing it completely. The word came to Abraham that you would have a son from your loins. Abraham and Sarah waited 10 years for the manifestation of that prophecy. After 10 years, this woman, knowing that she was barren, thought she was helping. She's old and barren. Her husband is old. And during that day, it was a custom that a slave could be used as a surrogate. Now let's go back to the prophecy that was given to Abraham. The child would come from your loins. It didn't say it would be from Sarah. Not the first time the prophecy was given. So Sarah offered Abraham Hagar. She said, the Most High has restrained me from bearing children. We know he said you would have one, so go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. Don't miss this. Abraham heard what Yah said. They waited for the manifestation and nothing happened. 10 years. When they came to this moment, why didn't he go back and get clarity? That's often where we miss it. The prophecy didn't say Sarah had to give birth to the baby, but they didn't go back and ask before putting their plan into action. So now they have Ishmael. It created issues we're still dealing with today. Abraham was sure that Ishmael was the son of the covenant, but 13 years later, he was told Ishmael's not the one. So Abraham and Sarah waited 25 years for the fulfillment of the promise, because when Abraham then mentioned Ishmael, that's when the Most High say, no, this child of the promise is going to come through Sarah, because I wanted to wait until the both of you were good and old so that nobody can get credit for this. I'm sharing this with you to help you understand. There are some who are hearing from the Most High, but they move without getting clarity. They jump out before the time and it causes confusion. Maybe you were told X, Y, and Z, but do you have the full understanding of that word? Did you test it? And this is the key. Sometimes the tester is time. He may have only given you a portion of the prophecy and you run too soon. We're told to write the vision and do what, family? Make it plain. How do you make it plain? You sit long enough to look at it from different angles. And when you're unsure about certain aspects of it, you wait for clarity. He said, I'm supposed to have a son. But did he say the son should come through Hagar? We write the vision and we make the vision plain so that he may run that readeth it. People are running and they're running off half cocked because we didn't wait for clarity. I've been there, done that. And there are times when we did wait, and we're sure about what he said, and he'll change some things. Go and offer up your son Isaac. Just as Abraham is about to draw the knife back, he's given different instructions. The faith walk is a day-by-day walk. It was never the Most High's intent for him to actually erase his son, but to test his obedience. So it was symbolic of what Yah would do later with Messiah. And this is why, family, it's so important for us to be led by the Spirit in these last days, because there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of confusion. So look, I've seen some of the messages that come through, some of the questions. I'm trying to say it now for all to hear, so that you get an understanding, so that you're not operating in confusion. Sometimes time is the tester. Time will allow you to become seasoned in certain things. I'm thinking of my mother. She's a cook at heart, you all. To this day, there are certain pots that she used to cook certain things in. Certain pans. For those of you cooks, you kind of know what I mean. It's almost like the pot has been seasoned to bring forth a certain flavor. You already know what that pot's gonna do. You already know that I can use this pot if I need to cook things for a couple hours. It's not going to burn up my food. It's heavy enough. I already know that I need this pan right here, this cast iron pot or this pan. It's been seasoned. It took time for you to learn. It took time for you to sit and to wait in the presence of the Most High, so that sometimes when he gives you something, I still have my journals, my information from 20 years ago that I go back and read, and I'm like, oh my word, look how this was fulfilled. Look at what he said here. Look at what he did here. And I was in my mid-20s when I was given the revelation about who Messiah was as the Word. I didn't share that information until years and years later, because he was showing me different things from different angles. And I'm not trying to say I got it all together. I rely heavily on the Holy Spirit, which is why I say I pray. Put a guard over my mouth. Don't let me say things I shouldn't be saying, or it's not time for me to say. And this is what I'm telling you to do, family. You won't be disappointed walking around in confusion, walking around in fear, if you learn how to sit and wait. I did a workshop on that. Was it earlier this year? For those who attended, if you attended, put yes in the chat. But we covered that. You need to learn how to hear. You also need to learn how to move scripture from head knowledge to heart knowledge so that you have an idea of how to divide. You all be led by the Ruach in this hour. Oh, I went over. But I believe that I covered everything that I needed to say. And the reason I'm doing it, family, is because my job is to point you to the source. When I point you to the source, you don't have to run to people saying, give me a word. You know how to go and get in his presence. You know how to sit and wait. You know how to hear. I point you to the source. I don't want to draw people unto me. I'm not the source. I'm running to the source myself. I'm sitting there and waiting and listening. So for those who are drawing people unto themselves, building their own little kingdom, it's going to crash. It's going to come crashing down. Our job is to teach you how to walk with him, how to hear from him, how to fellowship with him, how to worship him, not look at me. I'm pointing you to him, to the source. I think I said everything I was supposed to say. I trust Yah that you hear my heart, not trying to be overbearing, just trying to get you to learn how to guard your heart. Be careful how you hear. So I hope this has been a blessing to your family. All right, I am going to end it there. Again, thank all of you for the super chats. I appreciate it. Thank you for blessing the ministry. Thank you. I often forget to say those anonymous donors. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you. We praise the Most High for you. Praises to the Most High for his people, for what he's doing in this hour. Don't fear. Do not fear, family. You sit there until he replaces that fear with faith. He didn't bring us this far to leave us. You hear what I'm saying? And you remember what our people were like when they came out of Egypt. They were raggedy. They didn't have it all together. They did not. This is why he said he would put his word in our heart and in our mind. He's doing this. He perfects us. If we could make ourselves perfect, we would have done it by now. We failed at that. He makes us perfect. Do you understand what I'm saying? Trust Yah with you. With all the mess ups, take it to him. Repent. Get it right. Sit in your daddy's lap. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Empower me to turn away from this thing and let it go. I'm trying to end this thing. I'm trying to end. But you need to guard your heart in this hour, family. Guard your heart. If you heard nothing else I said tonight, don't let other people be your Holy Spirit. I'm not trying to be the Ruach for anyone else. Yah wants you to hear him, to learn how to pray, He wants to fellowship with you. You. Love you, family. Be blessed. Next time.